China was the first sprint race weekend of 2024 and the first of this new format, which I think worked fairly well. So the changes are now that we're doing the sprint race qualifying on Friday evening. On Saturday morning, we're doing the sprint race, and then we're back into a normal qualifying on Saturday afternoon, race full GP on Sunday. It does make it a busy weekend. So with just 1 hour to get the car right in FP1, it does make it tricky to be absolutely on point in qualifying just a few hours after that. However, the change is now that we can have a different car setup for Saturday afternoon and Sunday, effectively perhaps even two different setups if you wish across both parts of the weekend, and that creates a different dynamic, a different solution set that we have to work to, but I think a more interesting one for the sport and for ourselves. In terms of the result itself, we clearly underperformed in that first sprint qualifying on Friday. The car was more potent than that, but the tyres were just on a knife edge. You only get one set of medium tyres in Q1, and it was getting damaged very early on. In the case of our car, in fact, just after a few corners on that flying lap, it lost a lot of potential. And a lot of the work we did across the weekend was really creating a better car balance, a better setup that enabled us to get more out of that tyre come qualifying on Saturday afternoon. The other element of the weekend is across the last few races, it's quite clear a number of our competitors have brought quite sizable updates. Alpine, Haas and Sauber included in that, and we're falling behind in that regard. It's down to us now to make sure that we update the car sufficiently across the next 3 or 4 races to catch back up and start fighting for points again. In terms of the result, it was disappointing to finish behind the Alpine and behind the Haas, and there were other things we could have done in the race, including just a slightly different strategy, slightly better pit stop that may have put us one position further forward, and even then it's a question mark, but ultimately not in a position to fight for points at that event. And what we need to do now is make sure that we fight and bring the fight forward. There's many races left in the season, and fight back into a position where we're scoring points. Welcome to the Vowles Verdict, presented by Kraken. It's a good question. It's not driver error. Across the last few races, just a matter of seconds has separated us from the point-scoring car in P10. In China, that was just 5 seconds. The closest it's been is 1 second, and Japan was the furthest away, obviously following an incident with Alex at the beginning of the race. Those are fine margins, and it really describes well what's going on in the midfield at the moment, whereby there are 4 teams within just a millisecond or 2 of each other. And on the day, one of those teams will move forward or backwards, depending on which team gets absolutely spot on. We didn't have a quick enough car in China. I think that was fairly evident. Even when we were running in position, we weren't able to progress forwards, and there was no opportunity to separate or do something different enough to put us in that position. Part of that is that a whole season is a development race between teams. We're trying to continuously bring performance to the car. We have a few bits that have been added. We've got more coming to Miami, a lot more coming to Imola, but the rate of that between the different teams will always be different. And what's happened is Sauber and Haas and Alpine now have brought some strong aerodynamic developments, and I think you're seeing the result of that, and we've dropped back just a little bit to them. In truth, in that race, we had a number of cars retire or get caught up in accidents. So we just simply weren't where we should be performance-wise, where we need to be performance-wise. It's a long season though, and there's plenty of developments coming in the pipeline, but we've got to make sure they get to the car as quickly as possible and we start delivering performance. Logan on that last stint was using a lot of the front tyre to rotate the car, and that's been an inherent weakness all weekend. I think you saw that in sprint qualifying, so that Friday qualifying, we just weren't there or thereabouts, and it's because we damaged that front tyre after just a few corners and fell back. The same in the race. We did a lot of balance changes, a lot of setup changes to put us in a better position, but that was a very long stint we're asking for Logan, and he started right tucked up against another competitor. The result of that was he was sliding in the front just a little bit too much, and the drop-off is enormous. Short answer, no. We need to improve our pit stops, there's no doubt about it. We have active programs in place for the medium and long term in order to do that. It's not something you just improve overnight. I think we're behind on equipment relative to the top teams, and that's something we have to invest in and bring forward. But ultimately, that pit stop was a little bit slow, put us behind Sonoda's traffic and cost us on front tyres. but that wasn't a point scoring position. It made a gap to Esteban, but didn't allow us to undercut Esteban or be ahead of him. And we needed to be ahead of the Haas to have an opportunity to score points, and that simply wasn't on the table. It was a harsh penalty. When you see just matters of tenths translate into seconds, that's difficult. And more so, it's very difficult for the driver to have adjudicated whether it was ahead or behind. So the responsibility falls to us, and we missed it. We need to develop more and better automated tools that allow us to see what's going on at that point, because it took us multiple camera replays before even we could see where the difference was. For the onboards, which we have video for, you couldn't tell who was ahead and who was behind. The way penalties work is when it's in race like that, there's nothing you can do. You can't appeal it. Once the penalty has been provided and given, it's over effectively. It's adjudicated by the FI. And the adjudication was correct. We were behind at the line. Those are facts. What we have to do is improve our system and processes to make sure we catch that faster, because you can correct it. Logan would have to have slowed down during that initial incident. A few seconds later, let the car back through again, and then that would have corrected that position. It's fine margins, but that's what Formula One is all about. Short answer, yes. We'd already identified that based on the sprint race, the cars in the first lap are actually quite slow relative to expectations. And from starting from the pit lane, we strongly expected Logan to be on the back of the pack by the end of the lap. And that's exactly what it transpired. So what you lost out on was the ability to take a car, or maybe two, on the initial start phase, and perhaps with some dicing on the first lap of the race, in translation for some setup experiments, which aren't just for Miami. They're also there for the much longer term in understanding how the car's performing in slightly different aerodynamic configurations, but also understanding if there were items we can do to work with the Pirelli tires. So Pirelli set prescriptions for all teams. They're effectively in the form of temperatures for the blankets, but also pressures of where you leave the garage and stabilized pressures. And they're there for safety. That's the core part of the reason behind it, and applied to all of us equally. So it's a fair situation. What happened is those prescriptions did change between Saturday to Sunday, and that was one of the opportunities where it's enough on the front where you might want to try a different setup direction, which is what we were trying with Logan, to see if we can use that to our benefit or not, given we could start from the pit lane. In terms of understanding, we have a good set of data now with both different aerodynamic configurations, and the work is not one of minutes afterwards, but rather of days, to make sure we completely understand the characteristic differences and the performance differences. So yes, the experiment was very much a success. The actual outcome it will take still a few more days to fully understand. That is really the million-dollar question, which is where are we going to be quick going forwards? We have a car that is definitely better balanced than it was last year. It's also much better in a mix of conditions, whether it's windy, whether it's wet, whether it's dry, whether it's transitioning. There are multiple items that are just simply better than before. In terms of the real question, which is what tracks, I think it will go better in Miami than we did last year. I think, surprisingly, Monaco may also be a strong track for the car coming up in these next few races. But what you're really seeing at the moment is a development race, an aerodynamic development race between teams. And we've got to make sure that we're fighting at the front of that. It's a very close fought battle where the 10th is now really making the difference race on race. And we're going to make sure that we get there and fight for points soon.